Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey back in time. Not to mighty battles or grand castles, but right into the very kitchens and dining halls of the Middle Ages. Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. You're walking through a smoky, bustling medieval town. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and something else. Something that smells vaguely of stale cabbage and unidentifiable meat. You pass by a grimy stall where a vendor is hawking what looks suspiciously like a blackened, lumpy sausage. You feel a sudden pang of hunger and then a wave of nausea because you quickly realize that your modern, discerning palatian, likely your stomach, probably won't survive this trip. Seriously, what these folks considered a good meal might make your digestive system stage a full-scale revolt. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always wild to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on the fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in a rather cramped, dark dwelling, typical of a medieval peasant's home. The air is damp and the only light comes from a small sputtering fire in the hearth. The smell, you've quickly learned, is a constant companion. What immediately strikes you, if you were to peer into the humble larder, is the sheer, overwhelming presence of grain. It's everywhere, sacks of it, sheaves of it, and the ever-present, sometimes slightly mouldy, loaves of bread. You see, for the vast majority of medieval society, especially the serfs and common folk, bread wasn't just part of the meal. It was the meal. It was the backbone, the filler, the utensil, and sometimes the only thing standing between you and gnawing hunger. Imagine your daily life revolving around the harvest. From dawn till dusk, you're toiling in the fields, your hands calloused, your back aching. And what fuels this relentless labor? Most likely it's a coarse, dark loaf of bread, probably made from rye or barley, perhaps mixed with a bit of oats. This isn't your artisanal sourdough or fluffy white sliced bread. Oh no, this is heavy, dense, and often quite tough. It's designed to fill you up and stay with you, providing the slow-release energy needed for a day of back-breaking work. It's often baked in communal ovens, a social ritual in itself, where everyone brings their dough and waits for their turn. This shared baking process was a huge part of community life, a place where gossip was exchanged and friendships forged, all centered around the creation of this vital foodstuff. One of the more fascinating, and frankly a bit disturbing, quirks of medieval bread was its occasional role beyond mere sustenance. You might find yourself eating a trencher. No, not a trench of bread, but a trencher, which was literally a thick slice of stale bread used as a plate. You'd pile your meager stew or vegetables onto it, letting the bread soak up the juices, and then, when you were done, you'd either eat the soggy trencher, or, more often, give it to your dog or the poor. Talk about zero waste. It's an ingenious, if not entirely appetizing, solution to the lack of proper dinnerware. And historians still argue whether the primary reason for trenchers was truly economy-saving on potteria, if it was a deliberate culinary choice to enhance the meal's flavors. The sheer volume of grain consumed was staggering. An average medieval person might consume several pounds of bread a day. Think about that for a second. That's a lot of carbs, even for someone doing intense manual labor. And while wheat was preferred, especially for the more affluent, it was often too expensive for the common person. So rye, barley, and oats became the staples, sometimes mixed with legumes like peas or beans to stretch the flour further. The quality of your bread was often a direct indicator of your social standing. The finer, whiter bread made from sifted wheat flour was reserved for the nobility and the clergy, a symbol of their elevated status. Your bread, my friend, is probably a dark, hearty, and somewhat gritty affair, full of bran and whatever other bits snuck in during the milling process. You might even find the occasional pebble or insect adding an unexpected crunch. Just a little extra protein, right? This focus on grain meant that agricultural failures, like a bad harvest, were utterly catastrophic. Without the grain, there was no bread, and without bread, there was widespread famine. You can imagine the constant anxiety that must have permeated medieval life, knowing that your very survival hinged on the whims of the weather and the fertility of the land. It made every harvest a moment of profound relief, a temporary reprieve from the ever-present threat of starvation. As your journey through time continues, shifting from the medieval peasant's humble kitchen, you suddenly find yourself in a very different kind of social landscape, the world of medieval beauty standards. Forget your bronzers and self-tanners. In the Middle Ages, the ideal complexion was all about pale and pure skin, a stark contrast to the sun-kissed look often prized today. You'd quickly realize that achieving this look required considerable effort and sometimes rather questionable methods. Imagine a noble lady of the 13th century. Her most prized physical attribute, after perhaps a well-shaped nose and small mouth, would be her skin. It needed to be as light, unblemished, and smooth as possible. Why such an emphasis on paleness? Because a tanned or ruddy complexion was associated with outdoor labor, signifying a peasant or working class status. Pale skin, on the other hand, denoted leisure, indoor living, and wealth. You didn't have to toil in the fields under the sun. It was a visible badge of aristocracy. So, if you had a natural tan, you were already behind the beauty curve. To achieve this coveted paleness, medieval women, and sometimes men, went to surprising lengths. They might avoid the sun assiduously, wearing wide-brimmed hats or drawing veils across their faces when outdoors. Indoors, special washes and creams were used. Imagine concoctions made from ground almonds, rosewater, or even the rather less appealing and potentially toxic ceruse, a white lead-based paint. Yes, lead. Applying lead to your face for beauty. It sounds like a horror movie plot, doesn't it? A mainstream historical fact is the widespread use of cosmetics made from natural, often readily available ingredients, but also, crucially, ingredients that we now know to be poisonous. While many washes were plant-based, others incorporated lead, mercury, or arsenic. These highly toxic substances were believed to whiten the skin and remove blemishes, but in reality, they caused skin damage, poisoning, and even death over prolonged use. It was literally a case of beauty being skin deep, and sometimes fatal. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit related to complexion, the beauty patch. While more famously a 17th or 18th century fashion, the precursor, the plaster, appeared in the late medieval period. These were small pieces of silk or velvet, often cut into shapes like stars or moons, applied to the face to cover blemishes or smallpox scars. Imagine strategically placing a tiny velvet crescent on your cheek to distract from a pimple. It was an early form of cosmetic camouflage, but also, in its more elaborate forms, a playful fashion statement. Historians still argue whether these patches were primarily for concealing imperfections or if they served as a fashionable accessory that drew attention to the face in specific stylized ways. Beyond paleness, unblemished skin was crucial. Any marks, scars, or even freckles were seen as imperfections. Remedies to remove blemishes included washes made from vinegar, lemon juice, or even a rather unappetizing blend of honey and urine. The quest for perfect, porcelain-like skin was constant, driven by both aesthetic ideals and the desire to clearly distinguish oneself from the laboring classes. The texture of the skin was also important. It should be soft and smooth. Various emollients and oils, often infused with herbs like rosemary or lavender, were used to keep the skin supple. Perfumed waters were applied to leave a delicate scent, acting as a subtle counterpoint to the less than hygienic realities of medieval life we've discussed before. So, as you imagine carefully applying a lead-based paste or strategically placing a tiny velvet star on your cheek, you realize that medieval beauty standards were both aspirational and perilous. The quest for that radiant, untanned complexion was a powerful driver, pushing individuals to use methods that, to your modern eye, seem utterly bonkers. You'd definitely be reaching for a good SPF and a non-toxic concealer after this. Moving from the ideal of pale skin, your attention now shifts upwards to a particularly striking feature in medieval beauty standards: hair. Forget the elaborate curls or sleek bobs of modern trends. Medieval hair fashion was complex, often contradictory, and deeply tied to social status, modesty, and religious beliefs. You'd quickly realize that showing off your hair wasn't always a good idea. Imagine a noblewoman of the 14th century. While she might possess long flowing hair, she would rarely, if ever, display it openly in public, especially if married. For married women, modesty was paramount, and unbound hair was considered immodest and even provocative. Instead, her hair would be meticulously styled, braided, and then covered by various forms of headwear, veils, wimples, coif, or elaborate reticulated headdresses like the kohl or crispinet. These head coverings were not just for religious reasons, they were a fashionable necessity, signifying a woman's marital status and respectability. Imagine the effort of arranging your hair so perfectly only to completely hide it. For unmarried women and girls, displaying long flowing hair was more acceptable, symbolizing youth and virginity. Blonde hair was often prized, associated with purity and beauty. If you weren't a natural blonde, you might resort to washes made from saffron, lye, or even pigeon droppings. Yes, really, to lighten your locks. Talk about a commitment to color. It sounds like a rather smelly and potentially dangerous beauty treatment. A mainstream historical fact is the significant influence of religious doctrine on medieval hair practices. The church strongly advocated for modesty, particularly for women, which led to the widespread custom of married women covering their hair. This was seen as a sign of piety and virtue, aligning personal appearance with spiritual beliefs and differentiating Christian women from those of other faiths or perceived moral laxity. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit about medieval male hair, the fluctuating popularity of long hair versus short hair. While long hair was common for men in the early medieval period, symbolizing status and power, think Vikings or early Anglo-Saxon kings, later medieval trends, particularly in the 14th and 15th centuries, saw a shift towards shorter, more practical hairstyles, often cut above the ears. This wasn't a sudden universal change. It varied by region, social class, and individual preference, sometimes even sparking minor fashion debates. Imagine a medieval equivalent of long hair versus short hair arguments, but with less passionate online forums. Historians still argue whether these shifts in male hair fashion were primarily influenced by military practicality, changing social ideals of masculinity, or simply cyclical trends mimicking courtly styles. Hair care was rudimentary. Washing was infrequent, often with herb-infused water or a mild lye soap. Brushing was crucial to keep tangles at bay and to distribute natural oils. Combs were made of wood, bone, or ivory. Head lice were a constant battle, affecting all social classes, leading to various remedies involving oils, herbs, and meticulous delousing. Dyeing hair both for color and to cover grays was also practiced, using natural dyes from plants like walnut hulls for dark hair or saffron and onion skins for lighter shades. The results were often subtle and inconsistent, a far cry from the vibrant, predictable colors of modern hair dye. So, as you imagine yourself meticulously braiding your hair only to cover it with an elaborate headdress or attempting to lighten your locks with questionable concoctions, you realize that medieval hair was a canvas for complex social and religious statement. It was a world where personal expression through hair was often constrained by custom, and achieving the desired look involved more ingenuity and less hygiene than you might expect. You'd definitely appreciate your modern hairbrush and dry shampoo after this experience. Moving further up the face, from the intricate world of medieval hair, your focus now lands on a truly surprising, almost alien medieval beauty trend: the forehead. Forget your modern aversion to a receding hairline. In the Middle Ages, particularly in the later centuries, a high, expansive forehead was considered a pinnacle of feminine beauty, leading to rather extreme and often painful fashion choices. Imagine a noblewoman preparing for court in the late 14th or early 15th century. Her elaborate gown and headdress would frame her face, but the real star of the show was her forehead. The higher and more visible it was, the more beautiful she was deemed. This wasn't a natural look for most. So, what did they do to achieve this ethereal, intellectual doe? They would meticulously pluck or even shave their hairline back, sometimes as far as an inch or two, extending their forehead upward. And not just a hairline, eyebrows were also often completely plucked away or shaved off, leaving a blank canvas of pale skin. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, if you even had one, painstakingly pulling out individual hairs to extend your forehead. It sounds like a painful form of commitment. Why this seemingly strange obsession? A high forehead was associated with intelligence, aristocracy, and a serene, almost spiritual beauty. It also allowed for the elaborate towering headdresses that became fashionable in the late medieval period, providing a smooth, uninterrupted canvas beneath them. The absence of eyebrows further emphasized the purity and expanse of the forehead, drawing attention to the eyes below. A mainstream historical fact about this trend is its connection to the overall silhouette of late medieval fashion. As gowns became increasingly streamlined and elongated with high necklines and vertical emphasis, the high forehead complemented this aesthetic, creating a long, elegant line from head to toe. It was part of a holistic ideal of beauty that extended beyond the face to the entire body's presentation. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit related to the eyebrow situation, the use of mouse fur as artificial eyebrow. If a woman had plucked or shaved her eyebrows completely, or if they were naturally sparse, she might glue strips of mouse fur onto her brow line to create a faint, delicate arch. Imagine the faint tickle and the constant worry of an eyebrow falling off mid-conversation. It's a testament to the lengths people would go to conform to beauty ideals, even if it meant attaching rodent parts to their face. Historians still argue whether mouse fur eyebrows were a widespread practice or a more extreme, fashionable indulgence for the very wealthy and daring. Maintaining this look would be a constant effort. Hair regrowth would need continuous plucking or shaving, a meticulous and probably uncomfortable daily ritual. The skin on the forehead would need to be kept perfectly smooth and pale, free from any blemishes that might disrupt the illusion of pristine beauty. Various washes and creams, as discussed earlier, would be employed for this purpose. The popularity of this trend waxed and waned, and it was primarily a high-fashion aristocratic ideal. Peasants who spent their days in the sun would have had tanned, rugged foreheads and would likely not have had the time or inclination for such elaborate hair removal. So, the high forehead remained a distinct marker of social status, a visual cue that immediately broadcasted one's position in society. So, as you imagine yourself painstakingly plucking your hairline or gluing on a strip of mouse fur, you realize that medieval beauty was far from natural. It was a constructed ideal, often requiring pain and unusual methods to achieve. The high forehead, in particular, stands as a striking example of how aesthetic preferences can lead to utterly bizarre, yet historically significant fashion trend. You'd certainly appreciate the ease of your modern eyebrow pencil after this. From the stark, hairless expanse of the medieval forehead, your gaze now drops to the next crucial elements of the ideal face: rosy cheeks and red lips. Forget the subtle contouring of today. Medieval beauty favored a distinct, healthy glow, often achieved with bold, natural pigments, aiming for a youthful and vibrant appearance. You'd quickly discover that a touch of color was essential, but subtlety wasn't always the goal. Imagine a noble lady enhancing her complexion for a social gathering. While pale skin was the base, a face that was too pale could appear sickly or lifeless. The ideal was a delicate flush, a rosy hue that suggested good health, vitality, and youth. This wasn't a natural blush for everyone, especially after long winters or bouts of illness. So, what was her solution? She would apply rouge to her cheeks. The source of this medieval rouge was typically natural pigments derived from plants. Think crushed madder root, cochineal, a red insect dye, often used in textiles too, or various red berries and flowers. These would be ground into powders or mixed with a base like animal fat or plant oils to create a cream. Imagine the distinct earthy scent of these natural concoctions as they were applied. The application might be less about a diffused glow and more about a distinct, almost apple-cheeked redness. Similarly, lips were often enhanced with a reddish tint. A pale lip could also suggest illness. The ideal was a full red mouth indicating health and vibrancy. Again, natural pigments would be employed, perhaps by simply biting the lips to bring color, or by rubbing them with beet juice, crushed berries, or even a bit of the same red dye used for the cheeks. Imagine a medieval equivalent of a lip stain, but with the distinct taste of root vegetables. It sounds somewhat primitive, but effective. A mainstream historical fact about these medieval cosmetics is their reliance on organic and mineral sources, given the lack of synthetic chemicals. While this often meant they were less stable and more prone to spoilage than modern cosmetics, it also meant they were intrinsically linked to the natural world around them. The ability to extract and prepare these pigments was a valuable skill, often passed down through generations. Now for a rather quirky tidbit about the pursuit of rosy cheeks, the use of blood itself. While primarily an urban legend in later periods, some accounts suggest that in desperate attempts to achieve a vibrant flush, very extreme individuals might have resorted to literally pricking their cheeks or rubbing them with a small amount of their own blood to create a temporary, if alarming, flush. Imagine that as your beauty hack. It's a rather fringe and certainly extreme example, but it highlights the lengths some might go. Historians still argue whether such extreme methods were widely practiced or isolated instances exaggerated in later historical accounts. More commonly, diet and general health was seen as the true source of a natural blush. The overall effect of these applications was to create a youthful, vibrant appearance that contrasted with the pale skin, giving the face a lively and healthy look. This wasn't about creating a flawless, airbrushed look. It was about enhancing natural vitality. The ideal face was a canvas of contrasts. A smooth, pale forehead, offset by flushed cheeks and rosy lips, drawing attention to the features that signified health and fertility. So, as you imagine yourself rubbing crushed berries on your lips or dabbing a beet-based pigment on your cheeks, you realize that medieval beauty was surprisingly hands-on and often quite earthy. The quest for that perfect rosy glow was a blend of natural ingenuity and a willingness to apply whatever worked, even if it meant a rather bright, unblended look by today's standards. You'd certainly appreciate your modern blush brush and lip balm after this. From the rosy cheeks and red lips of medieval beauty, your attention now naturally drifts to the windows of the soul, the eyes. Forget dramatic winged eyeliner or elaborate eyeshadow palettes. The medieval ideal for eyes was typically one of brightness, clarity, and often a specific color preference with subtle enhancements rather than overt artistry. You'd quickly discover that the focus was less on elaborate makeup and more on an almost innocent, wide-eyed look. Imagine a medieval noblewoman preparing her eyes. The ideal eye was clear, bright, and often blue or light colored. While not everyone was naturally blessed with cerulean peepers, a luminous, healthy eye was universally desired. This was often achieved more through general health and perhaps good lighting than through heavy cosmetics. There was a belief that bright eyes signified a pure soul and good temperament. Darker eyes were not necessarily considered ugly, but lighter ones often featured more prominently in poetic descriptions of beauty. Makeup for the eyes, as we understand it, was quite limited. There was no widespread use of mascara or eyeliner in the modern sense. Any darkening might come from a simple kohl-like substance, made from soot or finely ground minerals, applied subtly to enhance the lash line or eyebrows, if they weren't plucked away, that is. The goal was to define, not to dramatically alter. Imagine gently smudging a bit of carbon around your eyes to make them stand out, hoping not to get any in your eye. A mainstream historical fact is the emphasis on naturalness, or at least the appearance of naturalness, in medieval eye makeup. Unlike later periods, like the Elizabethan era with its heavily painted faces, medieval beauty ideals generally shunned overt, obvious cosmetics. The aim was to enhance, to suggest innate beauty and health, rather than to create an artificial facade. This meant that any eye enhancement had to be subtle enough to appear as if it was simply part of your natural charm. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit related to eye health and appearance, the use of eyewashes containing strange ingredients to keep eyes bright and clear and to reduce redness or irritation, which would have been common given smoky interiors and poor ventilation. Medieval individuals might use eyewashes. Some recipes called for rose water or fennel water, which are relatively harmless. However, others included ingredients like powdered pearls, believed to add sparkle, or even, more alarmingly, the ashes of burnt worms or animal parts, thinking these would improve vision or clarity. Imagine putting ground up, incinerated invertebrates into your eyes for beauty. It makes your modern eye drop seem incredibly sophisticated. Historians still argue whether these peculiar eyewashes had any actual therapeutic benefit or if they were purely superstitious practices, given the limited medical understanding of eye health. The shape of the eye was also noted, with large, almond-shaped eyes often seen as beautiful. The overall expression was also important. A gentle, modest, and captivating gaze was preferred. Excessive blinking, squinting, or an overly bold stare would be considered unladylike or aggressive. Vision correction was rudimentary. Spectacles only became more common in the later medieval period, and then only for the very wealthy and learned. So, if you had poor eyesight, your eyes might look strained, and there wasn't much you could do about it, which would definitely impact your perceived beauty in that area. So, as you imagine trying to achieve that bright, clear-eyed look with limited and sometimes odd resources, you realize that medieval eye beauty was less about dramatic transformation and more about subtle enhancement and the perception of inherent purity. It was a time when your eyes truly did tell a story about your health and temperament, even if the methods to improve their appearance were often bizarre. You'd certainly appreciate your modern contact lenses and eye makeup removers after this. From the captivating yet subtly enhanced eyes of medieval beauty, your attention now shifts to the overall form, the body beautiful. Forget today's obsession with ultra-lean athletic physiques. In medieval times, the ideal body shape, particularly for women, was distinctly plump and pear-shaped. You'd quickly realize that a fuller figure was not just accepted, but actively celebrated, symbolizing health, fertility, and prosperity. Imagine the Rubens-esque figures celebrated in art, but apply that ideal to a medieval context. A woman with a rounded belly, full hips, and a soft, ample bust was considered the epitome of beauty. Why this preference for plumpness? In an era where food scarcity and famine were constant threats for many, a fuller figure signaled that you had enough to eat, indicating wealth and high social status. It was a visual declaration that you weren't toiling in the fields and were well fed. Poverty, after all, often meant gauntness and thinness. Beyond status, a plump figure was also strongly associated with fertility. In a society where producing heirs was paramount, especially for nobility, a woman who looked capable of bearing many healthy children was inherently beautiful and desirable. A rounded stomach, far from being hidden, was often emphasized by the cut of gowns and belts worn high above the natural waist, suggesting a fertile potential even when not actually pregnant. A mainstream historical fact is the stark contrast between medieval body ideals and modern ones, largely influenced by socio-economic conditions. Throughout much of history, a fuller figure symbolized wealth and health, especially in times of limited food supply. The lean aesthetic is a relatively recent phenomenon, largely a product of industrialized societies and the changing nature of physical labor and food abundance. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit related to the pear-shaped ideal, the strategic use of padding. While many noble women were naturally well fed, some might have used subtle padding to enhance their desired curves, particularly around the hips and stomach, to achieve that perfect pear shape. Imagine discreetly stuffing your garments to achieve a more desirable silhouette, much like modern shapewear, but for entirely different purposes. It highlights the lengths individuals would go to conform to the prevailing beauty standard. Historians still argue whether such padding was widely common or a more extreme practice, given the natural variations in body types. For men, the ideal physique was one of strength and robustness. A broad chest, strong limbs, and a generally solid build were admired, reflecting their roles as warriors, hunters, and land managers. While not necessarily plump in the same way as women, they were certainly not expected to be slender or delicate. A visible belly for a man might also signify prosperity and a comfortable life. Exercise for both sexes was often inherent in daily life: walking, riding, working. However, specific workouts for aesthetic purposes were non-existent. Diet was about sustenance and survival, not calorie counting or body shaping. Food was consumed for energy and pleasure, especially for the wealthy, not for achieving a particular body fat percentage. The clothing of the era also played a crucial role in enhancing these ideals. Women's gowns, with their full skirts and high waistlines, naturally accentuated the hips and stomach. Men's tunics and doublets often emphasized broad shoulders and a strong torso. The fashion worked with the desired body type rather than against it. So, as you reflect on the medieval preference for curves and robustness, you realize that beauty standards are deeply rooted in their historical and cultural context. The pursuit of plump and pear-shaped was a logical outcome in an era where prosperity and fertility were paramount. You'd certainly feel a strange sense of liberation, or perhaps even a bit of confusion, to find your modern diet and exercise routines completely irrelevant to the medieval ideal of beauty. From the celebrated curves of the medieval body, your attention now shifts to a part of the face that, in modern times, receives endless scrutiny: teeth. Forget sparkling white veneers or perfectly straight alignments. In medieval times, teeth were largely accepted as they were: natural, often imperfect, and frequently subject to decay and loss. You'd quickly realize that a dazzling smile, as you know it, was a rare sight indeed. Imagine a medieval person smiling. What you'd likely see are teeth that are discolored, perhaps yellowed from diet and lack of consistent cleaning. Gaps would be common, from teeth loss to decay, injury, or infection. While some individuals might have naturally straight teeth, perfect alignment was certainly not an aesthetic ideal, nor was there any means to achieve it. The focus was on functionality. Could you chew your food? If so, your teeth were doing their job. Dental hygiene was rudimentary at best. There were no toothbrushes as we know them. People might chew on sticks with frayed ends, a precursor to the toothbrush, or rub their teeth with rough cloths, sometimes using abrasive powders made from crushed herbs, charcoal, or even brick dust. Imagine trying to get a truly clean feeling with those tools. Mouth rinses might be made from vinegar, wine, or herbal infusions, primarily for freshening breath, which, given the dietary habits and general hygiene, was probably a welcome necessity. A mainstream historical fact is the widespread prevalence of tooth decay and gum disease across all social classes in the medieval period. Diets high in carbohydrates like bread and ale, coupled with a lack of effective oral hygiene, led to rampant cavities and infections. These conditions were often incredibly painful and frequently resulted in tooth loss or debilitating abscesses, sometimes even leading to more serious, life-threatening infection. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit related to medieval dentistry, the role of the barber surgeon. If you had a painful tooth, you wouldn't go to a dedicated dentist. Instead, you'd visit a barber surgeon who, in addition to cutting hair and performing minor medical procedures like bloodletting, also performed tooth extraction. Imagine having your painful tooth pulled out by someone who also gives haircuts, often with crude, unsterilized tools, and certainly without any effective anesthetic beyond perhaps a swig of ale or a strong herb. It sounds like a terrifying experience, and often was. Historians still argue whether barber surgeons' dental practices were more effective due to their direct approach, or if they inadvertently caused more harm due to lack of hygiene and understanding of anatomy. Despite the dental realities, a healthy, full set of teeth was implicitly appreciated, as it signaled good health and the ability to eat well. However, outward aesthetic perfection was not a primary concern. There was no pressure to hide your smile or to undergo painful procedures purely for cosmetic reasons. Acceptability was the norm. The diet of the era, while leading to decay, also meant less exposure to processed sugars, which would become a major factor in dental health in later centuries. However, the abrasive nature of some medieval breads, remember those bits of grit from the milling process, could also contribute to tooth wear. So, as you imagine a medieval smile, perhaps imperfect but functional, you realize that beauty standards were far kinder when it came to oral aesthetics. The constant pursuit of a gleaming, perfectly aligned smile is a very modern construct. You'd certainly appreciate your modern dentist and fluoride toothpaste after seeing and smelling the medieval alternative. Your teeth would definitely thank you for not living then. From the imperfect yet functional medieval smile, your focus now shifts to the other half of the beauty equation, the male ideal. Forget the chiseled jawlines and six-pack abs of modern action heroes. In medieval times, the masculine beauty standard was primarily about being strong and fair, embodying qualities essential for leadership, protection, and the practicalities of medieval life. You'd quickly realize that a man's worth was far more about capability than sculpted physique. Imagine a medieval knight or lord, the epitome of male attractiveness. His ideal form was one of robustness and physical capability. This wasn't about being overly muscular in a bodybuilding sense, but rather having a powerful, sturdy build that could withstand the rigors of warfare, wear heavy armor for hours, and endure long journeys on horseback. A broad chest, strong shoulders, and muscular limbs were admired, signaling virility and martial prowess. A man who looked physically weak or frail would inspire little confidence in a society where military strength was paramount. Beyond brute strength, fairness, meaning light complexion and often light hair, eyes, was also often a prized attribute, particularly among the nobility. This connected to the same ideals of paleness for women. A lighter complexion suggested less exposure to outdoor labor, thus indicating higher status. Blonde or reddish hair was often seen as attractive, linking back to heroic figures from legends and saga. However, dark hair and eyes were by no means considered unattractive, and regional variations in preference were significant. A mainstream historical fact is the central role of chivalry in shaping the male ideal. Chivalry, as a code of conduct for knights and nobles, emphasized not just martial skill but also courage, loyalty, honor, courtesy, and piety. Therefore, a man's inner qualities and adherence to these virtues were as crucial to his perceived beauty and attractiveness as his physical appearance. A handsome brute might be admired for his looks, but a chivalrous lord would command respect and admiration. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit about medieval male grooming: the beard. While clean-shaven faces became more fashionable in some periods, beards, especially full, well-kept ones, often went in and out of style and carried significant symbolic weight. They could signify wisdom, maturity, and authority. Imagine a powerful king with a long flowing beard, meticulously groomed, that added to his formidable appearance. It was a conscious choice that often aligned with prevailing aristocratic trends, sometimes even dictating who could or couldn't wear one based on their rank or age. Historians still argue whether the popularity of beards was primarily a fashion statement, a symbol of masculinity and wisdom, or a practical consideration in a time of less frequent bathing. A man's hands were also important. While not as soft as a noblewoman's, they should ideally be well kept, signaling that he was not engaged in manual labor. Well-trimmed nails, for example, were a sign of refinement. His posture should be upright and confident, reflecting his social standing and authority. Clothing for men, while less restrictive than women's, still contributed to the ideal. Tunics, doublets, and cloaks in fine fabrics and rich colors, like deep blues, greens, and reds, emphasized a broad chest and strong frame. Armor, when worn, further enhanced the image of strength and protection. So, as you observe the medieval male ideal, from his robust build to his fair complexion, and perhaps a distinguished beard, you realize that male beauty was far more about functional strength, social status, and moral character than about idealized physical perfection. It was a beauty that spoke of capability, leadership, and the virtues of the age. You'd certainly find your modern gym routine and meticulous shaving habits somewhat out of place in this context. From the rugged fairness of the medieval male ideal, your senses are now assaulted by a more pleasant, yet equally revealing, aspect of medieval beauty standards, perfumes, and scents. Forget your subtle modern eau de toilettes. In a world with less than perfect hygiene, medieval fragrances played a crucial role in masking less desirable odors and signaling wealth, status, and desirability. You'd quickly discover that a good medieval person smelled quite a bit. Imagine a noble lady or a wealthy lord preparing for a social gathering. While we've discussed infrequent bathing, this didn't mean they accepted unpleasant body odor. Instead, they relied heavily on various forms of perfume products to make themselves more agreeable. These weren't sprays from an atomizer. They were often solid concoctions, oils, or powders applied directly to the skin or clothing. Think of richly scented sachets tucked into sleeves, pomanders carried on chains, or perfumed waters liberally applied. The ingredients for these medieval perfumes were largely natural, derived from plants and animal secretions. Common floral notes included rose, lavender, jasmine, and orange blossom. Spicier, more exotic scents like frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, cloves, and musk from the musk deer were highly prized, often imported from the East and incredibly expensive. Civet, a strong, animalic scent, was also used, often in tiny, almost undetectable quantities, to give depth and longevity to a perfume. Imagine the complex, sometimes overwhelming, blend of these natural fragrances. A mainstream historical fact is the significant role of aromatherapy and scented materials in medieval life beyond just personal fragrance. Pomanders, perforated containers holding aromatic substances like ambergris, musk, or spices, were carried not just for pleasure, but also as a supposed protection against illness, as bad air miasma was believed to cause disease. Imagine constantly holding a perfume ball to your nose, hoping it would ward off the plague. This blend of cosmetic use and perceived medicinal benefit was very common. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit about medieval scent application, the use of perfumed gloves. Gloves were a common accessory for the wealthy, and they were often heavily perfumed, not just for the wearer's pleasure, but as a subtle way to transfer scent during a handshake or a courtly gesture. Imagine shaking someone's hand and being left with a lingering, intense floral or musky aroma on your own skin. It was a discreet yet effective method of broadcasting your personal scent and wealth. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of perfume gloves was purely cosmetic, a subtle display of luxury, or if it served a practical function in a society with different hygiene standards. Beyond personal use, scents were also used to perfume living spaces. Strewing herbs on floors, as we've mentioned, added a fresh aroma. Incense would be burned in churches and wealthy homes, creating a spiritual or luxurious atmosphere. Even clothing and linens might be scented with dried herbs or pomanders while stored in chests. The goal was to create a pleasant sensory environment, combating the less desirable background smells of a medieval castle. The quality and intensity of one's perfume were direct indicators of wealth and status. Only the richest could afford exotic musks, ambergris, or true civet. Less affluent individuals might rely on simpler, local floral waters or dried herbs. So, your personal scent trail was a subtle yet powerful social signal. So, as you imagine yourself wafting a perfume sachet or shaking a heavily scented glove, you realize that medieval perfumes were far more than just a pleasant accessory. They were a necessary tool in a world of different hygiene standards, a display of wealth, and a subtle form of communication. You'd certainly appreciate your modern deodorant and the discreet nature of contemporary fragrances after this rather more pungent historical immersion. From the fragrant haze of medieval perfumes, your journey now shifts to the practical tools and ingredients used to achieve these beauty ideals. Mirrors, and makeup kits. Forget your brightly lit vanity tables and extensive arrays of palettes. Medieval cosmetic enhancement involved rudimentary tools, often dangerous ingredients, and a good dose of ingenuity. You'd quickly realize that applying makeup was a far less precise art. Imagine a lady of the court preparing her face. Her most essential tool would be a mirror. However, these weren't the clear, perfectly reflective glass mirrors, you know. Medieval mirrors were typically made of polished metal, like silver, bronze, or highly polished steel, or later, small pieces of glass backed with metal, often convex to capture a wider reflection, but offering a somewhat distorted or murky image. Picture trying to apply fine details to your face using a small, imperfectly reflective surface, perhaps in dim candlelight. Precision was not easily achieved. Her makeup kit would be a far cry from your modern cosmetic bag. It would likely consist of small pots or jars containing various pastes, powders, and liquids. The colors would be limited, primarily reds for lips and cheeks and whites for skin lightening. She might have small wooden or bone spatulas for application, or simply use her fingers. There were no blending sponges or precise brushes. A mainstream historical fact is the widespread, yet often hidden, use of white lead cerusse as a skin lightener. Despite its known toxicity, which caused skin corrosion, hair loss, and eventual death, it was highly prized for creating the porcelain white complexion favored by the elite. It was applied as a paste, forming a mask-like layer over the skin, designed to conceal blemishes and give an unnaturally smooth, pale appearance. It was the ultimate dangerous foundation of the era. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit about medieval beauty ingredients, the use of egg whites for skin tightening. Beyond the dangerous mineral compounds, many medieval beauty recipes incorporated more natural and less harmful ingredients. Egg whites were commonly used in facial masks, believed to tighten the skin, reduce wrinkles, and give a youthful glow. Imagine carefully painting your face with raw egg white, waiting for it to dry and create a temporary tautness. It's a messy but relatively benign beauty hack that sounds straight out of a modern kitchen. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of such natural remedies were genuinely physiological or primarily psychosomatic due to the ritual of application. For lip and cheek color, as we discussed, ground plant matter, madder, cochineal, or berries would be used. For a subtle eye enhancement, soot or finely ground charcoal might be applied carefully with a damp stick or finger. Eyebrows, if not plucked, might be darkened with a similar substance. These applications were far from sophisticated. Blending was minimal, and the colors could appear stark or uneven. The acquisition of these ingredients varied. Some, like local herbs and berries, could be gathered. Others, like exotic spices for perfumes or rare mineral pigments, would be incredibly expensive, sourced through apothecaries, traveling merchants, or from specific noble households that imported them. Your makeup kit was often a reflection of your wealth and access to rare commodities, and the act of applying makeup was often done in private, away from prying eyes. While the end result was public, the process was considered somewhat undignified, a confession that one was not naturally perfect. This added another layer to the performance of medieval beauty. The effort had to be concealed. So, as you imagine squinting into a dim, polished metal mirror, carefully dabbing on lead-based paste or painting your face with egg white, you realize that medieval makeup was a courageous, often dangerous, act of transformation. It was a world where beauty came with significant risks and required considerable, often messy, effort. You'd certainly appreciate your perfectly formulated, non-toxic, and easy-to-apply modern cosmetics after this historical detour. From the rudimentary tools and risky ingredients of medieval makeup kits, your journey now brings you to the broader world of beauty regimens themselves, a realm often fraught with risky business. Forget your dermatologist-approved skincare routines and scientifically formulated products. Medieval beauty treatments were a fascinating blend of folk wisdom, strange ingredients, and often highly dangerous practices that could do more harm than good. You'd quickly realize that pursuing beauty could literally be a matter of life and death. Imagine a noblewoman striving for flawless skin. Beyond the lead-based cosmetics we've discussed, remedies for skin blemishes, wrinkles, or freckles could be alarming. Washes containing mercury were sometimes used to lighten skin and remove spots, despite mercury being a potent neurotoxin that could cause tremors, madness, and eventual death. Imagine rubbing liquid metal onto your face, believing it would make you beautiful. Other concoctions might include arsenic, another deadly poison, in powdered form for skin whitening or hair removal. The lack of understanding about toxicology meant that these substances were seen as powerful, not perilous. For hair removal, beyond plucking, remedies involving quicklime calcium oxide, a corrosive substance, or even cat dung was sometimes suggested. Imagine attempting to remove unwanted hair with a strong chemical or animal waste, risking severe skin burns and infection. It makes modern waxing seem like a spa day. This highlights a rather unsanitary but widely practiced aspect of medieval beauty. A mainstream historical fact is the pervasive danger of lead poisoning from cosmetics like cerusse. Medical historians and archaeologists have found evidence of lead poisoning in medieval remains, often attributed to the long-term use of lead-based beauty products, causing skin lesions, neurological damage, and other debilitating conditions. The pursuit of paleness often came at a severe, long-term health cost. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit about medieval beauty treatments, the use of crocodile dung for freckle removal. Yes, you heard that right. Some medieval beauty texts, drawing from ancient sources, suggested applying a paste made of crocodile dung, or sometimes even elephant dung, if you were really exotic to the face, to fade freckles and lighten the complexion. Imagine the smell. And the efficacy? Highly dubious, to say the least. It's a bizarre example of how desperation and limited scientific knowledge led to truly strange remedies. Historians still argue whether such extreme remedies were genuinely widely attempted, or if they were largely theoretical recipes recorded in texts, rarely put into widespread practice due to their repulsive nature. Beyond the truly dangerous, many treatments were simply ineffective or uncomfortable. Herbal poultices, washes made from stale urine, believed to cleanse and purify, or vigorous rubbing with abrasive materials were common. The results would be inconsistent and the discomfort significant. Skin infections and irritations would have been common, often exacerbated by the very treatments intended to improve the complexion. The preparation of these beauty concoctions was often done by apothecaries, wise women, or even the ladies of the household themselves, using recipes passed down through generations or found in early medical and cosmetic texts. There was no quality control, no standardized dosages, and certainly no safety testing. Every application was a gamble. So, as you imagine a medieval individual bravely or foolishly dabbing toxic lead onto their face, or applying a paste of animal dung to their skin, you realize that medieval beauty was a brave, often painful, and shockingly dangerous endeavor. The lack of scientific understanding meant that the line between cosmetic and poison was often blurred, making the pursuit of beauty a literal health hazard. You'd certainly cling to your modern, safety-tested skincare products after this historical dive. Having explored the often perilous world of medieval beauty regimens, your focus now shifts to how these desired physical attributes were presented and even manipulated. Clothing as beauty's frame. Forget modern form-fitting garments that celebrate every curve. Medieval attire, with its layers, draping, and specific cuts, was meticulously designed to enhance or conceal, to create a silhouette that perfectly embodied the era's aesthetic ideal. You'd quickly realize your body was simply the armature for a carefully constructed visual. Imagine a noble woman dressing. Her gown wasn't just a covering, it was a carefully engineered structure. The emphasis on a rounded belly and full hips, as we discussed, was subtly reinforced by gowns that were often cut with a higher waistline just under the bust, allowing the fabric to drape loosely over the stomach area. Belts, if worn, might be placed higher than the natural waist to further emphasize this fertile silhouette. Sleeves could be voluminous, adding to the overall sense of generous proportions. The fabric itself, in rich velvets, silks, or wools, added bulk and draped in soft, flattering folds. For men, tunics and doublets were tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and a strong chest, often with wide sleeves or padded elements that created a powerful masculine silhouette. Leggings or hose, while fitted, were not designed for the extreme muscular definition we might see today, but rather to show strong, capable legs. The overall male frame was one of robust strength and authority. A mainstream historical fact about medieval clothing is its ability to dramatically alter the perceived body shape. Through clever tailoring, padding, and the use of specific undergarments, garments could create illusion. For example, the high-waisted, flowing gowns of the 14th century, or the later, more structured kirtles, subtly accentuated a full abdomen and hips, even if the wearer was naturally slender. Fashion literally reshaped the body to fit the ideal, rather than conforming to individual figures. Now, for a rather quirky tidbit about how clothing concealed and revealed. The décolletage or neckline. While modern fashion often focuses on cleavage, medieval necklines, especially in the later periods, were often cut quite wide or low, but more to reveal the upper chest and shoulders rather than the breasts directly. This was seen as a mark of beauty, drawing attention to the pale, unblemished skin of the neck and upper chest, often framed by elaborate jewels. Imagine a neckline that emphasizes your collarbones and upper sternum as the height of allure, rather than anything more revealing. Historians still argue whether the evolving necklines were primarily a response to changing beauty ideals, a way to display expensive jewelry, or a subtle pushback against earlier, more restrictive modesty norms. Headwear, as we explored with hair, also played a crucial role in framing the face and enhancing specific features. The towering hennons and elaborate veils of the late medieval period drew the eye upwards, emphasizing the high plucked forehead and the delicate framed face below. For men, elaborate hats or coif could add height or breadth, contributing to their imposing presence. The very quality and color of the clothing were also part of the beauty frame. Rich dyes, expensive furs, and intricate embroidery not only signaled wealth and status, but also enhanced the overall visual appeal of the wearer, making them appear more refined and, by extension, more beautiful. A beautifully dressed person was inherently seen as more attractive, regardless of their natural features. So, as you envision yourself draped in these elaborate, strategically cut garments, you realize that medieval clothing was a masterful artifice. It was designed to enhance, conceal, and construct a visual ideal, making the body a canvas for a culturally prescribed vision of beauty. You'd certainly appreciate the ease of choosing clothes that simply fit your body rather than needing your body to fit the clothes after this. After journeying through the many facets of medieval beauty, from pale skin and high foreheads to plump figures and perfumed gloves, your exploration now draws to a close. As the subtle scents of rosewater and dried herbs fade, you are left to reflect on how these ancient ideals, despite their quirks and sometimes dangerous practices, still subtly echo in our modern understanding of aesthetics. This final reflection is about the legacy of medieval beauty and how elements of it, perhaps surprisingly, influence us today. Imagine looking at a painting or a portrait from the medieval era and then seeing a modern fashion advertisement. While the explicit ideals are vastly different, you might find surprising points of continuity. That emphasis on clear, unblemished skin, for instance, remains a foundational beauty standard. While the methods have changed from lead-based paints to advanced skincare, the desire for a smooth, even complexion persists across centuries. No one is actively promoting blotchy skin as beautiful, even if we've moved past the literal paleness. The appreciation for a healthy glow, a certain rosiness in the cheeks, also finds its modern counterpart in blushes and tints designed to give a natural flush. While we might not be rubbing berries on our lips, the aspiration for vibrant, full lips is a timeless ideal that connects us directly to medieval attempts at enhancement. A mainstream historical fact that highlights this continuity is the enduring appeal of certain classic features that transcend specific eras. A well-proportioned face, bright eyes, and a pleasant overall expression were valued then and still are today. While the specific context changes, e.g. the high forehead, the underlying principles of facial symmetry and a sense of health often remain constant across disparate beauty standards. It seems some aspects of what we find appealing are deeply ingrained. Now, for a rather quirky reimagining of a medieval beauty legacy, consider the modern fascination with natural or heritage beauty products. While not directly using crocodile dung, there's a growing trend towards using plant-based extracts, rosewater, honey, and natural oils in cosmetics, ingredients that would be instantly recognizable and largely harmless to a medieval woman. Imagine the surprise of a medieval apothecary seeing shelves full of organic and all-natural creams, realizing that much of what's old is new again. It's a cyclical echo, a return to simpler and safer ingredients, if not the same extreme applications. Historians still argue whether this modern trend towards natural beauty is a true appreciation of historical methods, a romanticized rejection of industrial processes, or simply a cyclical fashion that coincidentally aligns with ancient practices. Even the male ideal of strength and robustness finds a faint echo in modern fitness culture, albeit with a much more defined and sculpted aesthetic. The underlying value of physical capability and vitality, however, remains consistent. No one is aiming for frailty as a male beauty ideal, then or now. Perhaps the most significant legacy is the understanding that beauty standards are social constructs, not universal truths. The medieval preference for plumpness, or a plucked hairline, seems bizarre to us, just as our obsession with certain body fat percentages or cosmetic surgeries might puzzle a medieval observer. This historical journey helps us see that what is considered beautiful is a constantly evolving cultural phenomenon, deeply influenced by economics, religion, social status, and technological capabilities. As the medieval castles and bustling markets fade from your mind's eye and you settle deeper into your bed, you're left with a richer understanding of beauty. It's a journey that reveals ingenuity, desperation, and surprising similarities across centuries. And perhaps you now look at your own reflection and the beauty products around you with a newfound sense of historical perspective. End of script. Sweet dream.